is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are offering 4 conversations from episode 14, in which Louise, Campbell, Jörn Schattenberg, and I take a look at the highlights of what should be a very exciting second quarter. Since we didn't post this episode until Friday afternoon, we will forego the Vault episode for a week, and it will return next week at the back end of our Liver Forum 14 session. In this conversation, each of us identifies one event in the second quarter we find particularly exciting. Louise Campbell starts by focusing on 2 VCTE developments in the UK, the NICE decision on FibroScan in primary care settings, which is due in April, and an announcement from the National Health Service for England that NHS plans to spend £2.3 billion opening 100 community scanning centres featuring FibroScan by 2025. Jörn Schattenberg focuses on the upcoming EASL Congress, which promises exciting new presentations of Phase 2 and 3 drug trials and extremely exciting advances in diagnostics, possibly including NITs that prove to be prognostic. I focus on the upcoming ad board and PDUFA date for Intercept Pharmaceuticals' butyrolic acid, which has the potential to become the first drug approval on NASH and really to change everything. One more comment from me about this conversation. I introduce an idea I describe as the Nashamon of NASH. This metaphor, which stems from the famous Japanese movie Rashomon, describes a situation where multiple people see the same event in completely different ways. Now that aligns with a vision of NASH diagnosis and treatment I've used in the past, in which multiple stakeholders, frontline treaters, MD specialists, consumers, patients, payers, each have the same different views that you would find in NASH Rashomon, or in the metaphor that's more commonly used, the blind people touching the elephant. Listen to what I believe this will mean in terms of different levels and kinds of education and communication we need in order to share the entire Nashamon with our community. The next 3 months promise an array of exciting events here in Nashville, conferences, papers, and perhaps a key, really exciting regulatory milestone. You can hear the excitement and enthusiasm in our voices and our manner, so just sit back, listen, enjoy, learn, and when you're done, join the dialogue on our LinkedIn discussion group. This second quarter, consistent with everything else, the pace of change increases, and the second quarter has just a ton of stuff in it. And I think where I'd like to start is I'd like to ask each of the 3 of us to pick the one thing that's going to happen in the second quarter that we think is likely to be the most momentous or most compelling. Brave one, go first.
Louise Campbell.
I'll jump in because we've discussed it on the podcast a fair bit. The anticipated approval by the National Institute of Healthcare Excellence in the UK for FibroScan to be in the community and primary care setting for liver pathways. And I think we're waiting on the publication of that because it's been through a lengthy documentation. But one of the reasons that NICE is so important is there are a lot of countries that don't do the cost-effective analysis or these reviews in such an intense way and look to the UK system and NICE's approval before they will change their healthcare or look at these areas. So it's a gear stick for me for what could potentially happen. This will be followed. It has already been announced that the UK government is going to invest £2.3 billion over 2 years to put more liver non-invasive diagnostics, aka FibroScan, into our diagnostic hubs. So there is a genuine commitment that I see at a government level. And I think I said to you earlier, just personally, that Jeff Lazarus wrote a lovely report and showed a great poster at EASL a couple of years ago that was on who was the most prepared to be able to do an AFLD policy and implement that strategy. And the UK came top, although he was very keen to also say that everybody failed. The UK just failed less than anybody else. So
yes, when you said most prepared, I was thinking least unprepared is more like what he said. But yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. But I think there's a momentum that we haven't had before. It's whether or not we grab the momentum in the right ways, because you can get momentum in any disease field, but it can get washed away because other people just don't bring it on. So I think there is excitement, but there's trepidation that we don't do it in the right way. We make it labour intensive or too cumbersome to be able to get out there. But just picking up on Jörn's point from the conference, for me, that rang alarm bells. If we have 2 types of cirrhosis and we can't differentiate these 2 types on a biopsy, therefore the biggest need we have is stopping people getting to cirrhosis. And therefore that early detection gives us those opportunities to stop this hot and cold type of cirrhosis. So it becomes more important for early diagnosis. That for me is going to be important to see over the next, not just 3 months, but the next couple of years as this rolls out. and the domino effect that it could have.
So this will be our episode on April 24th, which is not the episode right after Louise comes back. That'll be our anniversary episode, which I'll talk about at some point today. But the week after that, we'll talk about those two stories, the NICE paper and the NHS England funding commitment, which after all these years firmly locked into my head. How do you type a pound sign on an Apple US English keyboard, which I'd never known how to do before without odd codes, but it turns out they made it simpler. You just go option 3 and there you are. So Louise, you've only been working on this forever. So it'll be exciting to see some of that stuff come to fruition.
Jörn Schattenberg.
This is great news from my side. Also, Louise, I think it's a strong signal forward. I mean, if a system that's based as much and strongly on referral and cost effectiveness as the UK implements, as we're going to get numbers for your system, for your healthcare system on the cost effectivity and the referrals. And I know this is going to be accompanied by some analyses that will show us how many detections we're going to make in which context. So I think this is very important and an interesting concept moving forward. I can tell you, I'm looking forward to our discussion on this. I'm involved in at least 2 or 3, let's say, research applications and some current research that looks at screening of the entire population for liver disease. And one of the big challenges is, what approach do we use? How much money do we spend? What is the accuracy of the tests? And I do see that the UK has found a good approach. I'm convinced that the approach will, identify advanced cases that haven't been identified, so we'll be preventing end stage, and the technology behind it is useful.
Jörn, I couldn't agree with you more. I also think that the fact that it's the UK doing this first speaks not only to Jeff's comment about who was least unprepared a couple of years ago, but also to the differences in terms of how the health systems look at investment in care. You know, in the US, we have tons of money invested in electronic medical records because Obama made that a pivotal element in the Affordable Care Act. And as a result, it's somewhat easier for us to capture real-time patient data on basic things like complete blood panels than it is in some other parts of the world. The idea that so much of our insurance is private and funded annually and that we have high patient turnover means that it's difficult to envision who would be willing to make the kind of investment that the British system, which has more centralized cost and is based more on qualities and cost effectiveness, is making. So, you can debate which systems are better at the others for doing what, but on this one, living on this side of the pond, I'm clearly jealous. I think that the government systems and the folks who take a look at efficiency in a broader context are going to do better on this, better on preventive.
We batter the NHS and we batter a lot of the health systems by not being good enough. For me, and not to give too much of the discussion for the episode we're going to cover it on, but it's about the investment in keeping people healthy. The only way we are going to save healthcare in any system is to stop getting sick where we can prevent it, because we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough opportunities to train. So, and I don't think it's born out of that. I think it is genuinely born out of the fact that liver disease has been one of the most under-recognised serious health conditions that is so intrinsic into all of the major ones that we are now saying, looking at the elephant in the room, we're just going to be in a position, I hope, that we can find the elephant in the room a lot easier, quicker, and stop patients waiting months and months on end for a discussion about it. So for me, obviously, I've talked about it for a long time, but this is the hard work of the British Liver Trust, the MPs, all of the experts that sit on these panels, and patients. And they're getting a result, and that, for me, is vital.
Pardon the small digression, and then we'll go to Jörn. But when you talk about the elephant in the room, I've taken to using 2 metaphors to describe NASH and liver disease and its place in the world. One of which is the parable of the blind people touching the elephant, where depending upon whether you're touching a tusk or the trunk or one of the legs or where you are, it's a completely different animal. And I think when people look at liver disease, on the one hand, we have Stephen Harrison's metaphor about the canary in the coal mine, which is very small and very finite. And then we have 6 blind people touching an elephant. There is a Japanese movie, I think in the 40s or 50s, called Rashomon, which is a classic presentation on multiple people describing the same event in radically different ways. You'll hear this phrase from me more as time goes on. I've taken to calling the phenomenon of how we look at the liver the Nashamon, because it rhymes, and therefore it's not alliterative. The litter is the first letter. It rhymes, so it's visual. And NASH is very much that. People look at it, and depending upon where you are, you see a very different story. I agree with you. Where you're looking at it right now, at the front end, when you can still prevent pretty quickly if you want to take action, is the place we all should be looking more. So welcome to the Nashamon. Jörn, pick an event for the first quarter that you want to talk about.
The first quarter runs till end of June, right? My scientific highlight is going to be ILC in Vienna, because the amount of data we're going to be seeing there will be incremental. There's going to be phase 3 data, in my expectations, going to be presented outside of press releases for the first time. There will be a wealth of biomarker data, even some predicting outcomes, which is the hot field at this point. We need biomarkers that we can use to risk stratify patients. There might be even some data as a preview to predict drug treatment response from some phase 2 trials potentially. And I think the excitement of many of the questions that we're asking, wondering for, being answered in high-quality data sets is one of my highlights. And of course, meeting people, potentially getting back together with you, Roger. Let's try to not record in a bathroom this time. Seeing Louise crouching in the shower again. Clearly, those are highlights.
We'll avoid that. I think we may just go back to doing what
we all had clothes on.
Yes, we did.
We just have to stress this.
Well, I've landed on having people record out of their hotel rooms as being the best way to go. Although there's a chance that we'll be doing some live real-time interviewing in Vienna as well. And I agree, Jörn, I'm excited to see people that I've gotten accustomed to seeing in person that I've now not seen for 8 or 9 months. And I think the data at that meeting will be fantastic. It also should be noted, it's the weekend right after which goes to my event, the PDUFA date for the review of obeticholic acid. So it's conceivable that we will have a response from the FDA by the time we get there if they stay on PDUFA schedule. And many are hopeful that that will be an approval. And if, in fact, that were the case, it would make Vienna a whole different meeting.
I agree. It would move the momentum in the field dramatically. Now, my question is how much of the detailed discussions are going to be able to go outside of that closed room? Of course, we're going to get the final reports, but the interesting aspects will be, which way did the discussion go? Which aspects were assessed differently this time? And the more data that be available from that discussion, I think it's going to inform the field and going to be very helpful for future developments.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email directly to questions@surfingnash.com. Next week, we will be joined by our friend Veronica Miller and others who participated in what promises to be a truly exciting, even inspiring Liver 14 meeting in Washington, D.C. this weekend. The meeting should be great, and the session on it should be among our best. So, until then, stay safe, surf on, and we'll see you on podcast. Bye-bye now.